Everyone, it's Lisa from I Dream in Soap. Welcome to my channel and thanks for dropping by. Now today it's time for another Soap Challenge Club challenge. Now quite often in the Challenge Club, Amy, who runs the Challenge Club, will invite a guest tutor to teach a new technique. And this month the guest tutor was me. In this video, I'm not going to completely recreate the tutorial that I made for the club, as a lot of people pay a monthly fee to see these tutorials. And you can do that too. I'm going to leave the links to the Challenge Club in the description below. And if you are a soap maker, it's so worth you doing it. No matter what level your skills are, you will learn so much from the Challenge Club. So why not give it a go? Let's have a look at the colourants that we're using in this soap then. So I'm going to be using some neon yellow and terracotta red. Both of those are from Mica Mama in the UK. And then some electric blue from You Make It Up. And some activated charcoal and titanium dioxide. There are two reasons why I created this technique for a challenge, and the first of those is using colours. Now you might say, well, using colours is easy, isn't it? But in this challenge it was important that you picked colours that went together well, but they would contrast against each other because you wanted to get a variegated, a stripy design. And if you chose what seemed like an obvious thing to do, a really dark colour and a really light colour, you may find that one colour completely took over the other. So it was quite important to think about your colours carefully. Now all I'm doing here is I'm taking those colours that we talked about a minute ago and just mucking around with them. So as you've perhaps seen me do before, in my red I'm adding a touch of green to make that red darker. I always add a touch of green rather than black, as it makes a much nicer darker red. And then also with the red I've used some of the neon yellow to tone it down into an orange. And then I'm going to be using my activated charcoal and titanium dioxide to make some grey and also to lighten one of those greens. So let's now start making up our soap batter. We're going to make up the batter for the entire soap in one go, and that takes me on to the second reason for creating this technique for the club. And that's to get people to really think about, learn about and understand how to control trace. Too often we see people letting the trace, the speed of their soap, control the design that they can do. So this challenge was really about starting to try to learn and understand more about the things that you can do to make sure you're in charge of the speed of your soap and how it moves and thickens, rather than letting it control the designs that you can make. So for our soap, I'm just going to blend it very gently just to mix those oils and lye together and get our soap to an emulsion only. Now we don't want a super light trace for this technique, but remember we've still got to work with our colours and get everything mixed in before we can even start to pour, and all the time you're doing that, your batter can be thickening up. I've actually jumped ahead to the point where I've divided the batter evenly into my jugs that had the colourant in, just because I thought you didn't need to see all the weighing out and everything. And now I'm just really carefully dispersing those colours and making sure that I'm happy with the colours that I've got. fragrant soil. And this is another really important factor in controlling your trace. For this technique, you wanted I'm going to kind of call it like a stable fragrant soil. You want one that's not going to accelerate your trace, so something that moves really slowly, but you also didn't want one that was going to de-accelerate your trace or slow it right down. Because if you had your soap batter too thin, then all of your colours are just going to muddle together. So choosing one that does actually move nice and slowly was the optimum. So again, learning about what supplies that you've got, how they work, and concentrate on really thinking about what you use to get the designs you want in your soap. And then next I'm going to take 3 of the colours and layer them into a squeeze bottle, and 3 of the other colours and layer them into another squeeze bottle. Now for the challenge you just needed to put 2 colours into a squeeze bottle and layer those in, but you could do as many as you like. You could also do as many squeeze bottles as you like. The overall idea was just to make sure that you were getting a nice stripy, variegated pattern going through your soaps to show that you've really picked up the skill of thinking about your colours and controlling your trace. At this stage, I'm very aware that my batter is probably too thin for the pour of this technique. So can you see how very careful I'm being when loading up my squeeze bottle? The way that I'm holding my bottle is I'm trying to keep it as still as possible. I'm not moving it up and down and jiggling it around. I want those layers in the bottle to stay nice and separate. And as we go through, that soap in the bottle will start to thicken slightly and preserve those layers for me. But at the moment, it's really fluid. And then I'll just jump halfway through the second bottle because I'm sure you don't need to see endless squeeze bottle filling. And as you can see here, I've used the darker green, the lighter green and my grey in this bottle. To pour the soap, we're just going to take our squeeze bottles and wiggle them in a zigzag fashion down the soap mould. Now, this was the very first time I did this technique, and I decided to use this attempt for this video just to show you, sort of some of the things that aren't necessarily so great when you first do it, rather than once I'd actually perfected it. And you can see here that my soap initially was a little bit fluid, which is why I've put a slight lean on my soap mould to stop it flowing all the way across the mould. I've got that little bit of just plain yellow at the top there, and again here with this grey, because that's the very first bit that squeezes out of the bottle before the colours start to come through. But that's okay, it's right on the bottom of the soap. So the idea here is to literally just go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in these lines, hopefully keeping them as nice and consistent as you possibly can. Now, we spoke about trace here, didn't we, and how important trace was. At the moment, my trace really is a bit too thin for this technique, but it's much better to start off with your trace a little bit too thin on the bottom of your soap, because these layers are going to get a bit squashed anyway as you get more soap on top of them. And then hopefully by the time you get to the end of your pour, then your trace will be at a perfect consistency. It's much better to do it that way than to wait now for your trace to be perfect and then find that you're really struggling to squeeze your soap out of your squeeze bottles by the end. This technique does not really need a ridiculously thin trace. You'll be surprised how thick your trace can be. You know, you could use a medium trace, it's going to be fine, and it will come out of these squeeze bottles and give you a good design. And as you can see here, mine's starting to thicken up just a tiny bit. It's still very fluid, and can you see how I'm actually getting these nice variegated stripy lines? And then you're just going to carry on and put one layer on top of the other. Again, another reason why you don't want a ridiculously thin trace. And how you layer it is up to you. I did, as you can see, this one where I've alternated my layer colours. Some later ones I kept the same colour in the same columns of colour, so they were consistent all the way through. You could do straightish lines that I've done here. You could wiggle through the mould. Up to you. Just come up with a design that you fancy. And then you're quite likely to find that you're going to have to refill your squeeze bottles partway through your pour. And can you see how much thicker my batter has got now? It's, as you can see, more a sort of medium trace, and that's really good now. It's still going to squeeze out nicely, but it's going to really give me a lovely pattern to my soap. I deliberately chose small squeeze bottles for this technique. Firstly, because I prefer the small ones, I find them easier to squeeze. And secondly, because I wanted to have to refill them. Remember, all the time that you have this soap inside your squeeze bottle, it's going to be thickening up, which we want it to a little bit, but we don't want it to get really, really thick. So therefore, if you only put a bit of your soap in your squeeze bottle, you can then keep going back to your jugs and stir in the other soap that's in those jugs and making sure that it stays fluid. So therefore, by having small squeeze bottles, you've got more control again over that trace, and you will just refill in the middle. Another advantage with the smaller squeeze bottles is that every time, remember, you tip your bottle up or down, so try and keep your bottle as still as you possibly can, it's going to slightly mix up that soap. So again, if you've picked up a really big squeeze bottle and put all of your batter in, that's a lot of up and down for you to do. So as you can see here, I'm starting to, as soon as my batter's thick enough that it's not going to run out of the squeeze bottle, I'm just going to lay them down so I can move them as little as possible. And I would say now, at this point, that my batter is pretty perfect. I would say it's about a medium trace. I'm getting some lovely stripy lines coming through, and the batter's still flowing enough that when I tap this mould down, it's all going to join together. I'm not going to have any gaps and holes in my soap. I've jumped to the end of the pour, well, let's say the squeeze, shall we? Because I'm sure you didn't want to watch endless amounts of squeeze bottles squeezing. And I'm just finishing off my last layer. One point about planning with this type of soap is to make sure that you've got enough soap so that you don't end up running out halfway through a row. So therefore, perhaps make up a little bit more soap than you would normally in this mould that you're using, because some of it will get stuck in the squeeze bottles, and obviously you do want to complete a full layer before having to stop. And then just to complete the design, I'm just going to do a little swirl all the way through with something reasonably thin. Now, if you wanted to, you could just leave it how it is, or you could swirl it. For the challenge, we did want people to put a swirl through their squiggle pour, just again to show that they've managed to control the trace at this stage still. And sorry, my camera keeps focusing on my head rather than the swirl, so I'll try and chop out the fuzzy bits. And then once that swirl's done, just a final gentle tap down just to make sure there's no gaps in your soap. And I like it like this with just, can you see that slight texture on the top? I think that really adds to the design. So now I'm going to CPOP this as normal, so into the oven on a really low setting, turn the oven off as the soap goes in. Because this is a slab, I will seal this with some cling wrap and I will leave this in the mould completely covered for at least 2 days as a best way to prevent any soda ash. So here's our soap a couple of days later, and really guys, if you do suffer with soda ash on your soaps, I'm lucky I don't really suffer on it. I'm not in a particularly humid environment, but do yourself a water discount and then keep that soap sealed up until saponification has finished. If you can bear to leave it in the mould for 2, maybe even 3 days, that will really help with your soda ash. Okay, so I'm just going to chop this up into little soaps and then we'll have a look at a final photo. Now if you like, you could plane the top of these soaps and you might find that you want to, if you do get quite a bit of soda ash. The design when you plane them is actually really quite cool, but also bear in mind whether you've planed them or not, you're going to see that really cool design as you use the soap anyway. I really like this texture on the top of the soaps, so I'm not going to plane mine. And then here are some final pictures of the soap. This is the one that I made in this video. And this is a picture of another one that I did where I actually planed the surface. And you can see the slight difference that you get when you do actually plane that top surface off. And it will also be what the soap looks like as you go through and use the bar. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you like the soap. If you have, it'd be great if you left me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see what I'm doing in the future, why not subscribe to my channel? And if you've got any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. Now I am away for a few days whilst this video is uploaded and published, so I may not be able to get back to your comments, but I will make sure that I read them and I do appreciate every single one of them. Thanks for watching everyone. Happy soaping!